What happens when a father's cruelest punishment becomes a daughter's greatest blessing? When tradition meant to break a spirit instead builds an unbreakable bond?
In a small village where honor matters more than happiness, where daughters are currency and love is considered weakness, one arranged marriage was designed to destroy two lives.
The bride was too headstrong, the groom too gentle.
Both were considered failures by their family's standards. But sometimes the very thing meant to cage you becomes the key to your freedom.
Sometimes a question as simple as, "What do you want?" can shatter generations of silence.
And, sometimes, two broken people can create something more beautiful than either family ever imagined.
This is the story of Mira and Arjun, strangers forced together in punishment, who discovered that the deepest rebellion isn't running away from tradition, but transforming it from within. Their journey proves that love doesn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it grows like a seed in the darkest soil, patient and persistent, until one day it blooms into something that can move mountains and change hearts. What began as the cruelest sentence became the most beautiful love story their village had ever seen. But, first, they had to survive the punishment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard where Mira sat grinding spices, her movements sharp with barely contained fury. Each twist of the stone mortar echoed her frustration. 22 years old and, still unmarried, a shame that hung over the Sharma household like a storm cloud that refused to break. Her father, Ramesh Sharma, stood in the doorway watching her with calculating eyes. His weathered face bore the permanent scowl of a man who had spent decades trying to control what couldn't be controlled. Mira had rejected 7 marriage proposals in 3 years. 7 carefully chosen alliances that could have elevated their family's status in the village. 7 opportunities wasted because his daughter had foolish notions about choice and compatibility. Mira, his voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Come inside." She didn't look up from her grinding. "I'm not finished here."
"You are finished with many things," he said, his tone carrying the finality of a judge.
"Including your opinions about marriage."
The grinding stone stopped.
Mira's hands stilled, recognizing the shift in her father's voice.
This wasn't another lecture about duty and honor.
This was something else entirely.
Inside the modest house, her mother Kamala sat in the corner, her usually expressive face carefully blank. Her younger brother Dev lounged near the window, but his casual posture couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. Something had been decided without her.
"Sit," Ramesh commanded. Mira remained standing. "What is this about?"
"Your marriage has been arranged." The words hit her like a physical blow, but she kept her expression steady.
"I've told you, you've told me nothing that matters," Ramesh's voice rose. "Your defiance has made us the subject of gossip. People question my authority as a father.
They wonder what kind of household produces a daughter who thinks she can choose her own husband like selecting vegetables at the market." Mira's hands clenched at her sides.
"Father, please. We've discussed this. I'm not ready? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think marriage is about being ready? You think love is something that happens in Bollywood films? Marriage is duty. Marriage is alliance. Marriage is what I decide for my daughter."
"Who?" The word came out as a whisper. Ramesh studied her face, savoring what he clearly saw as victory.
"Arjun Gupta."
The silence that followed was profound. Even Dev straightened in his chair.
Everyone in the village knew about Arjun Gupta. "The poet?"
Mira's voice cracked slightly. "The failure," Ramesh corrected with satisfaction.
"The 30-year-old man who writes poems instead of earning money.
Who lives with his mother and younger sister. Who has been rejected by every respectable family in 3 villages because he's considered too soft, too dreamy, too useless for marriage."
Kamala finally spoke, her voice barely audible.
"Ramesh, perhaps nothing," he snapped. "This is perfect justice. My stubborn daughter who thinks she's too good for practical men will marry the impractical man no one else wants. His family is desperate enough to accept even her, and we're desperate enough to finally get her married."
Mira felt the room spinning. Arjun Gupta was known throughout the village as the gentle giant who helped elderly neighbors with their gardens, who wrote poetry for children, who had never raised his voice or shown aggression toward anyone. He was considered weak by traditional standards, a kind man in a world that valued strength, a dreamer in a society that demanded pragmatism. "This is cruel," she whispered. "This is consequence," Ramesh replied. "You wanted to wait for love? You wanted to choose based on your feelings? Fine. Feel what it's like to be chosen by someone equally unmarriageable. Maybe marriage to a man who writes poems about flowers will teach you the value of the practical proposals you rejected." Dev spoke up tentatively. "Father, Arjun isn't a bad person, he's not a strong person," Ramesh cut him off. "Which makes him perfect punishment for a daughter who thinks she deserves strength." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Both families were using their children as weapons against their own disappointments. The Guptas were tired of their son's gentle nature making him unmarriageable. The Sharmas were tired of their daughter's independence making her unmarriageable. By forcing them together, both families could wash their hands of their problems. "When?" Mira asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Next month. The astrologer has already confirmed the dates. The arrangements are being made." Kamala rose from her corner, her maternal instincts finally overriding her obedience to her husband. "Ramesh, they should at least meet first. Talk to each other." "They'll have their entire marriage to talk," he replied dismissively. "If they even want to. For all I care, they can sit in separate rooms and contemplate their poor choices." That evening, Mira climbed to the flat roof of their house, a habit she'd maintained since childhood when she needed to think. The village stretched out below her, lit by kerosene lamps and the occasional electric bulb. Somewhere in those scattered lights lived Arjun Gupta, probably equally blindsided by this arrangement. She had heard about him, of course. Everyone had. The village wasn't large enough for anyone to remain a complete mystery. He worked in his family's small bookstore, helped his widowed mother with household tasks, and cared for his sister Priya, who had been born with a club foot. The village women sometimes spoke of him with a mixture of affection and pity. "Such a good boy," they would say, but not husband material. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had rejected practical men for being too focused on material success, and now she was being forced to marry an impractical man as punishment for that very rejection. Her father's revenge was perfectly calculated. But, as she sat under the stars, something unexpected stirred in her chest. Not excitement, exactly, but curiosity. What kind of man writes poetry in a village where poetry is considered useless? What kind of strength does it take to remain gentle in a world that demands hardness? 3 days later, she saw him for the first time since their engagement had been announced. She was at the market, selecting vegetables for the evening meal, when a commotion arose near the fruit vendor's stall. An elderly woman had stumbled, her basket of oranges scattering across the dusty ground. Several people stepped around her, more concerned with their own errands than her plight. Then, a tall figure moved through the crowd. Arjun Gupta knelt beside the woman, his movements careful and unhurried. He gathered the oranges one by one, checking each for damage before placing it gently back in her basket. His voice was too low for Mira to hear the words, but she could see the woman's face brightening as he spoke to her. When all the oranges were collected, Arjun helped the woman to her feet with the same careful gentleness. He carried her basket to her rickshaw, ensuring she was safely seated before stepping back with a small bow of respect. The entire interaction took perhaps 5 minutes. No one else seemed to notice it as anything remarkable. But Mira found herself staring, struck by something she couldn't quite name. This was her future husband. This gentle man who stopped to help elderly women while others walked by. This person her father had chosen as punishment. As Arjun turned to leave, their eyes met across the crowded marketplace. For a moment, time seemed suspended. He didn't smile, but neither did he look away. There was something in his gaze, not resignation, exactly, but a quiet acceptance that matched her own. He nodded slightly, a gesture so brief it might have been her imagination. Then, he disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Mira standing among the vegetable vendors with a basket full of questions and the strangest sensation that perhaps her father's cruelest punishment might not be what anyone expected. That night, she heard something she had never heard before. Singing. It came from the direction of the Gupta house, carried on the evening breeze. A man's voice, low and melodic, singing what sounded like a lullaby. She realized it must be Arjun, singing to his sister Priya. The song was beautiful and sad and tender all at once. It spoke of moonlight and dreams and the patience of growing things. It was the voice of someone who found beauty in ordinary moments, who could create something lovely out of nothing more than melody and words. Mira found herself listening until the song ended, then, waiting to see if another would begin. When silence finally settled over the village, she felt oddly bereft. Perhaps there were different kinds of strength, she thought as she lay down to sleep. Perhaps the man who could sing lullabies to his sister and help elderly women with their oranges wasn't weak at all. Perhaps he was something else entirely. Her father had meant to teach her a lesson about the consequences of defying tradition. But, as Mira drifted toward sleep, she wondered if the lesson she was about to learn might be entirely different from the one he intended. The wedding preparations moved forward with the mechanical efficiency of a business transaction. There were no excited discussions about decorations, no joyful shopping trips for jewelry. Both families approached the event with the grim determination of people fulfilling an unpleasant obligation. Mira submitted to the rituals with quiet resignation. The henna artist painted intricate patterns on her hands while aunts and cousins offered hollow congratulations. The sari fittings were conducted in near silence. Her mother tried to inject some traditional joy into the proceedings, but even Kamala's efforts felt forced and desperate. "He seems kind," Kamala said one afternoon while they sorted through jewelry for the ceremony. "That counts for something." "Father chose him specifically because he thinks kindness is weakness," Mira replied, not looking up from the gold bangle she was polishing. "This isn't about kindness, Mama. This is about punishment." Across the village, the Gupta household was managing their own version of joyless preparation. Arjun's mother, Shanti, was a practical woman who had raised her son to be gentle in a world that preferred aggression. She had long ago accepted that her son might never marry because of his temperament. "Are you angry?" she asked him one evening as they sat on their small veranda. Arjun considered the question while watching fireflies dance among the jasmine vines. "Angry at what? The situation? Our families? The girl? Any of it. All of it." "Anger requires energy I don't have to spare," he said simply. "Besides, she didn't choose this any more than I did." His sister Priya, 17 and sharp-eyed despite her physical challenges, looked up from the book she was reading. "Maybe that's something you have in common." "What do you mean?" "You're both being punished for being different." She rejected practical men because she wanted something more. You've been rejected by practical families because you offer something different. Maybe instead of being angry, you could be curious. Arjun smiled at his sister's wisdom. Curious about what? About who she really is. About what she really wants. About whether two people being punished for the same crime might actually understand each other. The observation stayed with him through the following days. He began to notice things about Mira that he hadn't paid attention to before. The way she walked through the village with purpose, never hurrying but never dawdling. The way she helped her mother with household tasks efficiently but without enthusiasm, as if her mind was always elsewhere. The way she sometimes stood on her roof in the evenings, looking out at something beyond the horizon. 2 weeks before the wedding, fate provided an opportunity for actual conversation. Mira was returning from the temple where she had gone to pray for wisdom, or courage, or possibly divine intervention to prevent the marriage entirely. The path home led through a grove of mango trees where the village children often played. Today, she found a small crowd gathered around something on the ground. As she drew closer, she realized it was a puppy, clearly injured and whimpering in pain. The children stood around it helplessly, wanting to help but unsure what to do. "What happened?" she asked. "It fell from that tree," one boy explained. "I think its leg is hurt." Mira knelt beside the small animal, her heart squeezing at its obvious distress. She had always been good with animals, but she wasn't sure how to help with what looked like a serious injury. "We need to get it to the veterinary clinic in the next village," she said. "But I don't know how to move it without making things worse." "I do." The voice came from behind her. Mira turned to find Arjun approaching with a small cloth bag in his hands. He knelt beside her, his movements calm and deliberate. "My sister's clubfoot required many doctor visits when she was small," he explained quietly. "I learned some things about moving injured bodies safely." He opened his bag and withdrew a small piece of wood and some strips of cloth. "This might not be perfect, but it should stabilize the leg enough to transport." Mira watched as he fashioned a makeshift splint with gentle efficiency. His hands were steady and sure, his voice soothing as he murmured to the frightened animal. The puppy seemed to relax under his touch. "There," he said finally. "Now we can move him." "We?" "Unless you prefer to go alone. But the clinic is quite far, and it would be easier with two people." It was the first real conversation they had ever had. As they walked the dusty road to the neighboring village, carrying the injured puppy between them, Mira found herself stealing glances at her future husband. "How did you know what to do?" she asked. "Necessity," he replied. "When someone you love is in pain, you learn what you can to help them." "Your sister?" "Yes. The doctors said she would never walk normally, but they also said there were things we could do to help her. Exercises, supports, patience. She's stronger now than they predicted she could be. You took care of her. We took care of each other. That's what family does." There was no self-pity in his voice, no resentment about the responsibility he had carried from a young age. Just simple acceptance of love's practical demands. At the clinic, they waited together while the veterinarian examined the puppy. The diagnosis was better than feared, a fracture, but one that would heal with proper care. "Someone will need to keep the splint clean and dry," the veterinarian explained. "And bring him back in 2 weeks for another examination." "I'll do it," Mira heard herself saying. "The children who found him live near my house," Arjun added. "I'll help." Walking back to the village as the sun began to set, they carried the sleepy, medicated puppy between them. The conversation came easier now, though still carefully polite. "Why did you reject the other proposals?" Arjun asked suddenly, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. That's too personal." "No, it's..." Mira paused, considering. When would she ever have another chance to be honest with someone who was supposed to be her life partner? They were good men. Practical men. Men who would have provided well and expected little beyond obedience. But they never asked what I wanted. "What do you want?" The question was asked so simply, with such genuine curiosity, that it caught her completely off guard. When had anyone ever asked her that? "I want..." she began, then stopped. What did she want? She had spent so long rejecting what she didn't want that she had barely considered the positive. "I want to matter. I want my thoughts and opinions to have value. I want to help people, maybe work with the midwife or teach children. I want to feel useful for something other than cooking and cleaning." Arjun nodded thoughtfully. "Those seem like reasonable things to want. My father thinks they're selfish and unrealistic." "Maybe your father is afraid that if you get what you want, it will prove that women are capable of more than he was taught to believe." The observation was delivered so mildly that it took a moment for its radical implications to register. Mira stared at him. "You think women should be allowed to want things?" "I think people should be allowed to want things. My sister wants to study literature at university. The village thinks this is ridiculous because of her foot, as if physical disability affects intellectual capacity. But her mind is brilliant. Why shouldn't she use it? And you support this?" "I plan to help her apply for scholarships. She's smart enough to earn them." They had reached the village center where their paths would diverge. Mira felt an unexpected reluctance to end the conversation. "Why do you write poetry?" she asked impulsively. Arjun smiled, the first real smile she had ever seen from him. Because some things can only be said in poetry. Some truths are too big for ordinary words. Could you share one? A poem? He looked surprised, then thoughtful. After a moment, he recited softly, "The caged bird dreams of flying, not knowing that the cage door was never locked." She simply never thought to push. The words hung in the evening air between them. Mira felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she wasn't ready to name. "Did you write that?" "Just now," he admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "It's not very good." "It's perfect," she whispered. They parted ways at the village center, each carrying their own thoughts about the conversation. For the first time since the engagement had been announced, neither felt entirely certain about the nature of their punishment. Over the following days, they began to encounter each other more frequently. Always by accident, or so it seemed. Arjun would be at the market when Mira arrived to shop. Mira would be visiting the injured puppy when Arjun came to check on it. Their conversations grew longer and more comfortable. "What do you think about in the evenings?" she asked him one day as they sat beside the small temple pond, watching the puppy attempt to walk with its splinted leg. "Stories, mostly. I imagine different lives for people. Different choices they could make." "Different from what?" "Different from the lives they think they're supposed to live. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if everyone just stopped doing what was expected and started doing what felt right." "The world would probably fall apart," Mira said, but she was smiling. "Or maybe it would become something better." As the wedding date approached, the strangest thing began to happen. What had started as punishment began to feel like possibility. Not love, exactly, but something that might grow into love given time and kindness. Their families noticed the change and seemed puzzled by it. The bride and groom were supposed to be miserable, resigned to their fate. Instead, they appeared to be having actual conversations. They smiled occasionally. They seemed curious about each other rather than resentful. "Are you happy about this marriage?" Kamala asked her daughter one evening, her voice confused. "I'm not unhappy," Mira replied carefully. "He's a good person." "But, you wanted to choose for yourself." "Maybe I am choosing. Maybe choosing to accept what's been given and see what I can build from it is also a choice." Across the village, Shanti was having a similar conversation with her son. "She could have been angry about this arrangement," she observed. "But she seems willing to try." "She's remarkable," Arjun said simply. "Intelligent and kind and strong in ways I don't think she even realizes yet." "You sound like you might be falling in love." Arjun considered this. "I think I might be falling in respect. Love might follow." 3 days before the wedding, Mira found a small piece of paper slipped under her door. On it was written a single line of poetry: "Tomorrow's courage is built from today's small acts of faith." She pressed the paper to her heart and smiled. Perhaps their families had intended this marriage as a punishment, but perhaps they had accidentally given their children something else entirely. The gift of someone who saw them clearly and chose to stay curious rather than judgmental. The wedding was beginning to feel less like an ending and more like an unusual beginning. The wedding day arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that makes everyone irritable. The families went through the motions of celebration, but the atmosphere felt more like a business merger than a joyous union. Guests attended out of obligation rather than excitement, and the usual wedding chatter was replaced by polite, careful conversations about everything except the bride and groom. Mira sat in the bridal preparation room, surrounded by female relatives who were doing their best to manufacture enthusiasm for an event everyone knew was more punishment than celebration. Her cousin Asha applied the traditional red sindoor to her hair, parting with the solemnity of someone performing a funeral rite. "You look beautiful," Asha said dutifully, but her voice lacked conviction. Mira studied herself in the mirror. The red silk sari was gorgeous, the gold jewelry was proper and expensive, and the henna on her hands had turned a deep, rich brown. She looked like a bride. But she felt like an actor playing a role she hadn't auditioned for. "Are you afraid?" asked another cousin, Nisha, who was barely 16 and still believed in fairy tale marriages. No, Mira realized with surprise. I'm not afraid. And it was true. Over the past month of conversations with Arjun, her anxiety about the marriage had transformed into something else entirely. Not excitement, exactly, but a calm certainty that whatever happened next, it wouldn't be what anyone expected. In the groom's preparation area, Arjun was having his own moment of clarity. His uncle was helping him with the elaborate gold and cream silk kurta while offering unwanted advice about marriage. Don't let her walk all over you, Uncle Raj said, tying the turban with unnecessary force. I know she rejected other proposals, but you're her husband now. She needs to understand that. What she needs, Arjun replied calmly, is to be treated with respect and kindness. Everything else will follow from that. Uncle Raj snorted. Respect and kindness. That's why you couldn't find a wife on your own. Women need strength, boy. They need to know who's in charge. I think they need to know they're safe, Arjun corrected. And that their thoughts matter. And that they're valued for more than their ability to serve. The older man shook his head in disgust. Hopeless romantic. Well, maybe this girl will teach you some practical sense about women. Arjun thought about Mira's sharp intelligence, her gentle care for the injured puppy, her genuine curiosity about his poetry. Maybe, he said, smiling slightly. Maybe she will. The ceremony began at sunset, as tradition demanded. The families gathered in the Sharma family courtyard, which had been decorated with marigold flowers and mango leaves. The priest droned through the ancient Sanskrit verses while guests fanned themselves in the heat and waited for the important parts. When the moment came for the couple to see each other for the first time as bride and groom, their eyes met with none of the shyness tradition expected. Instead, there was recognition. These were two people who had spent the past month getting to know each other, carefully and quietly building something that might grow into partnership. You look beautiful, Arjun murmured as they sat side by side for the first ritual. You look terrified, Mira whispered back, noting the slight tremor in his hands. Not terrified. Determined. Determined to do what? To prove that our family's punishment can become our blessing. The ceremonies continued. They walked around the sacred fire 7 times, each circle representing a vow. They promised to support each other, to remain faithful, to share their joys and sorrows. The words were ancient and formal, but, as Arjun and Mira spoke them, they felt surprisingly personal. When the final ritual was completed and they were officially husband and wife, the families managed a brief celebration. There was food and music and the traditional throwing of flower petals. But everyone seemed eager to conclude the formalities so the bride could be transferred to her new home. As evening deepened into night, the inevitable moment arrived. Mira bid goodbye to her family and walked the short distance to the Gupta house, accompanied by a small procession of relatives. The transition felt surreal, like stepping from one life into another completely different one. The Gupta house was smaller than her father's, but it felt warmer somehow. Shanti greeted her with genuine kindness rather than the calculating assessment Mira had expected from a mother-in-law. Priya, who had been too shy to attend the wedding ceremony, welcomed her with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased rather than politely obligated. I've prepared the back room for you both, Shanti said as she showed them through the house. It has good cross-ventilation for the hot season, and there's space for Arjun's writing desk. The room was simple but clean, with 2 narrow beds placed along opposite walls. Clearly, Shanti wasn't assuming anything about the physical nature of this arranged marriage. The consideration was both practical and compassionate. When they were finally alone, Mira and Arjun stood awkwardly in the center of their shared space. All the comfortable conversations of the past month seemed to have evaporated, replaced by the strange intimacy of actually sharing living quarters. I know this is difficult, Arjun began carefully. Everything about this situation has been imposed on us rather than chosen. But I want you to know that nothing else needs to be imposed. We can take our time figuring out what this marriage means to us. Mira felt a rush of gratitude for his gentleness. What do you think it means so far? Partnership, I hope. Friendship, certainly. Everything else can wait until we both feel ready. And if we never feel ready for everything else? Arjun shrugged. Then, we'll have a good friendship and our families will have to live with their disappointment. I'd rather have an honest relationship with you than a false one that looks right to everyone else. That first night, they talked until nearly dawn. About books and dreams and the strange circumstances that had brought them together. About Priya's ambitions for university and Mira's interest in learning to assist the village midwife. About Arjun's poetry and Mira's secret desire to learn to read English. I could teach you, Arjun offered. I have some English books from my college days. You went to college? For 2 years. Literature studies. My father thought it was impractical, but my mother insisted education was never wasted. What made you stop? Father died. The family needed me to work, not study poetry. Do you regret it? Arjun considered this. I regret that circumstances made the choice for me. But I don't regret being here to help my family. And now I don't regret being here to meet you. The comment was simple, but it carried weight. This was perhaps the first truly romantic thing either of them had said to each other. The weeks that followed established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mira helped with household tasks and learned to work alongside Shanti, who proved to be an efficient but not demanding mother-in-law. Arjun continued working at the family bookstore and writing in the evenings. They shared meals, conversation, and increasingly comfortable silences. The village watched their adjustment with curiosity and confusion. The marriage that was supposed to be a punishment for both families seemed to be working out rather well. The bride and groom were often seen talking together, walking together, even laughing together. It was not what anyone had expected. They seemed happy, Kamala observed to her husband one evening, watching through the window as Arjun and Mira walked past their house carrying books. They seemed content, Ramesh corrected gruffly. That's different from happy. Is it? When did you last see our daughter look content? Ramesh had no answer for that. 3 months into the marriage, the moment came that would define everything that followed. Mira was helping the village midwife, Savitri, with a difficult birth when complications arose. The woman had been in labor for nearly 24 hours, and both mother and baby were in distress. We need to get her to the hospital, Savitri said urgently. But the nearest one is 2 hours away, and I don't think we have that much time. What can we do here? Mira asked. Pray, Savitri replied grimly. And hope. But Mira wasn't content with hope. She ran through the village to the Gupta bookstore, where Arjun was organizing inventory. I need your help, she said breathlessly. Can you ride a bicycle? Yes, but the woman having the baby needs medicine from the pharmacy in the next town. Savitri says it might save them both, but someone has to get there and back quickly. Arjun didn't hesitate. Show me what to get. He rode the bicycle harder and faster than he ever had, arriving at the distant pharmacy as they were preparing to close. He explained the emergency, got the medicine, and rode back through the darkness with the desperate urgency of someone racing death itself. The medicine arrived in time. Both mother and baby survived. As they walked home together afterward, exhausted and relieved, Mira suddenly stopped in the middle of the road. What is it? Arjun asked. You didn't ask any questions, she said wonderingly. I told you I needed help, and you just helped. You didn't ask why I was working with the midwife instead of being home where wives belong. You didn't lecture me about propriety or safety. You just trusted that if I said it was important, it was important. Arjun studied her face in the moonlight. Why would I question your judgment? You're intelligent and compassionate. If you think something needs to be done, then it probably does. My father never believed my judgment was worth anything. Your father was wrong about many things. They stood looking at each other in the quiet street, and something shifted between them. Not the dramatic lightning bolt of movie romance, but the deeper recognition of two people realizing they had found something rare and valuable. Arjun, Mira said softly. What you asked me that day when we were walking back from the clinic? About what I wanted? Yes. I think I want this. This partnership. This respect. This feeling that my thoughts matter to someone. They do matter. They matter to me. And, what do you want?
Arjun reached out slowly and took her hand.
I want to build something beautiful with you. Something that belongs to us, not to our family's expectations or the village's opinions.
Something that proves that love can grow from the strangest soil.
Even if it started as punishment?
Especially because it started as punishment. Look what we've made from what was meant to hurt us. 6 months later, when Mira announced that she was expecting their first child, both families were forced to acknowledge that their punishment had become something entirely different. The couple who were supposed to be miserable had created a relationship based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared dreams. The baby, when she arrived, was healthy and strong and surrounded by love. They named her Asha, which means hope, because she represented everything beautiful that could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Years later, when people asked about their unusual love story, Arjun and Mira would smile at each other and say that sometimes the most beautiful flowers bloom in the darkest soil. Their marriage had been meant as punishment, but it became proof that love isn't something that happens to you. Love is something you choose to build, day by day, with patience and kindness and the radical act of seeing another person clearly. The question that changed everything wasn't, "Do you love me?" It was, "What do you want?" Because when two people care enough to ask that question and respect the answer, everything else becomes possible. Their families never quite knew what to make of the success of their failed punishment. But Arjun and Mira knew exactly what they had built together, a love story that belonged entirely to them, forged from circumstances that were meant to break them and made strong by their decision to choose each other again and again, one small act of faith at a time.